Sometimes life doesn't change all at once. It begins with a quiet feeling you can't explain, as if the person you used to be is still moving through your days, but something deeper inside you has already stepped away. You keep doing familiar things, seeing familiar faces, waking up in the same world, yet something feels slightly out of place. Not broken, not wrong, just different, as if reality is waiting for you to notice the doorway hidden inside the ordinary. And maybe that's why this message found you now. Because there are moments when you're not lost, even though nothing feels certain. You're standing between two versions of yourself, close enough to hear the old one calling you back, but already sensing the new one watching from ahead. The strange part is this. The portal doesn't open when life becomes clear. It opens when you finally understand why everything has started to feel unclear. You may have been expecting the portal to look like a dramatic event, a sudden breakthrough, a door opening in the sky, a moment so obvious that nobody could mistake it. But the strange thing about the deepest thresholds is that they often arrive disguised as ordinary days. You wake up, answer messages, drink your coffee, speak to people who think they know you, and still, something inside feels slightly removed from it all. It is not that life has become meaningless. It is that the old meaning has started to loosen. And once that happens, you begin to sense that the real doorway was never outside you. The hidden truth is that a portal is not a place. It is a change in the way you can no longer belong to the version of life that once felt automatic. The old self was built from repetition, from survival, from memory, from the quiet agreements you made with fear before you even realized you were making them. It knew what to tolerate. It knew how to smile when something hurt. It knew how to keep walking through rooms where your soul had already gone silent. But now, some part of you refuses to perform that role with the same conviction. This is why the threshold feels so unstable. Nothing may have visibly collapsed, yet your inner world begins to rearrange itself. You may still live in the same home, follow the same routine, speak to the same people, but something in you has stopped accepting the old interpretation of your life. What once felt normal now feels rehearsed. What once felt necessary now feels strangely heavy. What once gave you identity may now feel like a costume you forgot you were wearing. And the most confusing part is that nobody around you may notice the shift. Psychologically, this is the moment when identity begins to separate from habit. For a long time, you may have believed that who you are is simply what you do, what you fear, what you remember, what others expect from you. But then there comes a quiet disturbance. You catch yourself reacting differently. You pause before saying yes. You feel tired of explaining yourself. You lose interest in proving things to people who once had power over your emotions. These are not random mood changes. They are signs that the structure holding the old self together is beginning to weaken. And this is where many people mistake the portal for a problem. They think they are failing because they feel uncertain. They think they are losing themselves because old desires no longer excite them. They think something is wrong because the familiar no longer brings comfort. But what if uncertainty is not the opposite of awakening? What if it is the first sound the inner world makes when it is no longer willing to live inside a pattern that became too small? What if the confusion is not darkness, but the space between two forms of sight? You are standing at an invisible threshold when the life behind you still has your name on it, but the life ahead of you has already begun calling in a language you do not fully understand. That is why you feel pulled, paused, delayed, exposed. One part of you wants to go back to what was predictable. Another part knows that returning would feel like betraying something real. And this is the beginning of the deeper mystery, because once the threshold appears, you do not meet only the future. You also meet the version of yourself that is afraid to leave the past. There is a strange phase in transformation when you are not one person anymore, but not yet another. You move through your days with two selves living inside the same body. One knows how to survive the old world. The other knows there is something beyond it. One speaks in caution. The other speaks in recognition. One wants to keep things manageable, familiar, safe. The other keeps whispering that safety is not the same as truth. And between these two voices, your life begins to feel like a room where two people are silently watching each other. The old self is not evil. It is tired. It learned how to protect you when you did not know another way to live. It built defenses out of politeness, silence, overthinking, pleasing, hiding, delaying, controlling, pretending not to care. It kept you moving through situations you did not yet have the strength to question. So when the new self begins to rise, the old self does not simply disappear. It panics. It asks, what will happen if we stop being who they expect us to be? And that question can feel heavier than any external obstacle. The new self does not always arrive with confidence. Sometimes it arrives as discomfort, sometimes as boredom with what used to excite you, sometimes as a sudden honesty you can no longer push down. You may find yourself unable to continue conversations that once felt normal. You may feel exhausted around people you used to seek approval from. You may sense that certain dreams, goals, and attachments were never truly yours, but borrowed from a version of you that wanted to be accepted. This realization can feel freeing and painful at the same time. This is why emotional pressure increases near the portal. The old self wants evidence before moving forward. The new self wants movement before evidence appears. The old self asks for guarantees. The new self knows that guarantees are often just another cage. You may feel pulled toward change and then suddenly afraid of it. You may make progress, then feel tempted to return to an old pattern, an old relationship, an old identity, an old version of comfort. Not because it is right for you, but because the nervous system often mistakes familiarity for home. And then the strange coincidences begin to feel louder. A phrase appears at the exact moment you were thinking about something. A conversation reveals what you were trying to avoid. A song, a dream, a repeated number, a random memory, a sudden silence in your chest. All seem to point toward the same inner crossing. Maybe reality is not forcing you. Maybe it is reflecting the tension you are finally conscious enough to see. The outer world begins to echo the inner split, and you realize the conflict was never just about choices. It was about identity. The portal exists in the space where these two selves can no longer pretend not to see each other. The old self stands behind you, holding every reason to stay the same. The new self stands ahead, carrying no map, only a strange sense of truth. And you are in the middle, feeling both the grief of what is ending and the magnetic pull of what has not yet arrived. But when these two selves begin watching each other, something even stranger happens. The world around you starts to feel unfamiliar, as if reality itself has noticed that you are no longer the same person looking at it. There comes a moment when the world around you has not changed, but your relationship to it has. The same streets look slightly different. The same room feels quieter than before. The same conversations seem to echo in a strange way, as if you are hearing not only what people say, but what they are avoiding. You may sit among familiar faces and feel a distance you cannot explain. Nothing dramatic has happened on the surface, yet something inside you is no longer touching reality in the same way. This is one of the most unsettling signs of inner transition. When consciousness begins to shift, the world does not immediately rearrange itself to match you. At first, everything remains where it was. The job, the routine, the habits, the relationships, the old obligations. But the meaning that once held them together begins to dissolve. You still recognize your life, but you no longer recognize yourself inside it. And that is why it can feel like you are walking through a place you once belonged to, but now only visit. The hidden truth is that familiarity depends on identity. A place feels like home when the version of you who lives there still exists. A relationship feels natural when the part of you participating in it still believes in the role. A goal feels exciting when it belongs to the person you still think you are. But when that identity starts to loosen, the world becomes unfamiliar, not because reality has turned against you, but because you are no longer interpreting it through the same inner lens. This can happen in small, almost private ways. You may open a message and realize you do not want to respond the way you always did. You may hear someone speak to you in an old tone, expecting the old reaction, and feel something quietly refuse. You may look at your calendar and wonder why so much of your life was arranged around things that no longer feel alive. It is not anger exactly. It is not even sadness exactly. It is the strange silence that appears when your soul stops identifying with a script. Psychologically, this is the breaking of unconscious agreement. For years, you may have agreed to be a certain person because that person helped you survive, belong, be loved, avoid conflict, feel important, or remain safe. But awakening begins to reveal the hidden contracts behind your behavior. You start seeing where you said yes out of fear, where you stayed because leaving felt unknown, where you called something loyalty when it was actually self-abandonment. And once you see the pattern, you cannot fully unsee it. This is why the familiar begins to feel like a costume that no longer fits. You can still put it on, but something in you knows it is not yours in the same way. The strange feeling is not a sign that you are becoming disconnected from life. It may be a sign that you are becoming connected to a deeper layer of it. But before that deeper layer can become visible, something will test whether you are truly ready to stop obeying the old one. And often, that test arrives wearing the face of fear. Every threshold has a guardian, but not always in the form people imagine. It may not appear as a figure standing before you, blocking the way. It may come as a sudden wave of doubt the moment you begin to change. It may come as nostalgia for a life you know was too small, but still somehow miss. It may come as an old habit, returning with perfect timing, just when you thought you had outgrown it. The guardian is not outside the portal. It rises from the part of you that still belongs to the past. This guardian often speaks in reasonable sentences. Maybe now is not the time. Maybe you are overreacting. Maybe you should just be grateful. Maybe this is all in your head. It rarely feels like an enemy at first. It feels like caution, maturity, responsibility, even logic. But beneath its voice is a deeper question. Are you truly ready to leave behind the identity that once protected you? Because the old self will not surrender simply because the new self has appeared. It will ask for proof. It will ask for permission. It will ask for one more delay. The hidden truth is that the obstacle is not there only to stop you. It is there to reveal what still owns you. If fear appears, it shows where your freedom is still negotiated. If doubt appears, it shows where your trust is still fragile. If temptation appears, it shows what part of the past still has access to your hunger. If nostalgia appears, it shows which wounds have disguised themselves as memories. The guardian does not create these forces, it exposes them, so you can finally see what has been shaping your choices from the shadows. You may recognize this in your own life. Just when you decide to move forward, someone from the past returns. Just when you begin to respect yourself, an old situation invites you to shrink again. Just when you feel clear, a familiar fear arrives and makes everything look complicated. It can feel like life is trying to pull you backward. But perhaps the deeper pattern is different. Perhaps reality is asking whether your transformation is only an idea or whether it has reached the level of action. This is where many people turn back without realizing it. Not because they are weak, but because the guardian knows their oldest language. It knows how to use guilt, loneliness, desire, shame, comfort, and memory. It knows the exact images that make the old life look safer than the unknown. And yet, the new self does not argue in the same way. It does not usually shout. It does not always explain. It simply creates a quiet ache whenever you betray what you now know. The guardian at the gate is the moment when your awakening becomes practical. Not dramatic, not mystical in a distant sense. Practical. It asks what you will do when the old pattern becomes available again. It asks whether you will confuse peace with familiarity. It asks whether you will call the cage home just because you decorated it beautifully. And if you listen closely, you may realize the guardian is not guarding the door from you. It is guarding the next version of you from everything you are not ready to release. There is a silence that appears when an old version of you begins to fall away. It is not the peaceful silence people imagine. it is stranger than that. It can feel like standing in a room after everyone has left, still hearing the echo of voices that no longer belong there. You may not be able to explain what ended, because life may still look the same from the outside, but inside, something that once defined you has lost its authority. And when that happens, you enter the most mysterious part of the portal. This is the moment between death and becoming. Not physical death, but the symbolic death of an identity that can no longer carry your truth. The self that needed approval begins to lose its grip. The self that accepted less than it deserved begins to feel unreal. The self that confused survival with purpose begins to dissolve. And yet, the new self is not fully formed. It has no clear face yet. It does not arrive with instructions. It arrives first as absence, as emptiness, as the strange feeling that you cannot go back, but do not yet know how to go forward. This is why transformation can feel lonely. Not because you are abandoned, but because the deepest changes often happen in places no one else can enter. People may ask what is wrong, and you may not know how to answer. How do you explain that you are grieving someone you used to be? How do you explain that you miss a life you no longer want? How do you explain that the things that once gave you identity now feel like old photographs of a person you recognize, but cannot fully inhabit anymore? Psychologically, this is the collapse of the familiar self-image. For years, you may have carried a story about who you are. The responsible one, the strong one, the invisible one, the forgiving one, the ambitious one, the one who always understands, the one who always returns. And maybe that story gave you a sense of place, but now, something deeper is asking whether that story was truly you, or simply the role you learned to play so the world would know how to treat you. The emotional realization is that emptiness is not always a sign that something has gone wrong. Sometimes emptiness is what remains when the false structure finally stops speaking. You may feel unmotivated, detached, quiet, uncertain, even strangely calm in situations that once controlled you. This can be frightening, because the old identity will call it numbness. But perhaps it is not numbness. Perhaps it is space. Perhaps it is the first clean space your soul has had in years, now that old fears are no longer filling every corner. And still, this space asks for courage, because nothing in you can be reborn while you are still pretending the old shape fits. This is why the portal feels like loss before it feels like freedom. Something must stop calling your name before the new voice can become clear. Something must fall silent before you can hear what has been waiting underneath. And just when you begin to wonder whether this emptiness means you are disappearing, the first signs begin to appear, subtle, strange, and impossible to ignore. The signs rarely arrive as thunder. More often, they appear as quiet repetitions that begin to disturb your sense of coincidence. You see the same number again and again. You dream of places you have never visited, yet wake up with the feeling that they know you. A conversation answers a question you never said out loud. A song returns from the past with a meaning it never had before. At first, you may dismiss these things, but after a while, the pattern becomes harder to ignore, as if reality has started leaving fingerprints on your attention. The hidden truth is that signs are not decorations around transformation. They are often reflections of an inner alignment that is already happening. When your consciousness begins to shift, your attention changes. And when your attention changes, the world begins to reveal patterns that were always there, but previously hidden beneath distraction, habit, and emotional noise. The sign is not always saying, "Look at me." Sometimes it is saying, "Notice who you are becoming," because the old version of you would have missed this completely. This is why vivid dreams often increase during inner crossings. Dreams begin to speak in symbols before the waking mind can form clear sentences. You may dream of houses, water, strangers, roads, locked doors, storms, childhood places, people you thought you had forgotten. These images may not need to be interpreted like puzzles. Sometimes they are emotional weather. Sometimes they show what your conscious mind has not yet admitted. Sometimes they reveal that a part of you is already leaving one world and preparing to enter another. Emotional purges can also become signs. You may suddenly cry without fully knowing why. You may feel anger rise from old places. You may feel grief over things you told yourself were finished. This does not mean you are going backward. It may mean the body is releasing what the mind tried to organize too neatly. The nervous system remembers what the personality learned to explain away. And when the portal becomes active, the hidden material begins to move, not to punish you, but to clear the passage. Then comes the strange detachment. You may stop craving certain conversations. You may stop chasing explanations. You may feel less interested in being understood by people who benefit from misunderstanding you. Endings may happen suddenly or quietly, without the drama you expected. Time itself may feel unusual, moving too fast on some days and painfully slow on others. These shifts can make you wonder whether you are losing connection with reality. But perhaps you are losing connection only with the version of reality that depended on your old identity. The deeper realization is that the signs are not asking you to become obsessed with them. They are asking you to become honest with yourself. Repeated numbers, dreams, endings, intuition, emotional waves, sudden clarity, all of them point back to one thing. Your consciousness is no longer vibrating at the same level as before. But this raises the question most people avoid. If the crossing has already begun, what part of you cannot come with you? Because every portal has a price, and the price is rarely what you first imagine. Every crossing asks for something, but not always in the way people fear. The price is not necessarily your whole life falling apart. It is not always losing everyone, abandoning everything, or becoming unrecognizable overnight. Sometimes the price is quieter, more intimate, and much harder to explain. It is the moment you realize you can no longer keep carrying what was built for a version of you that no longer exists. And this is where the portal becomes serious, because the new life does not open fully while the old identity is still negotiating. There are attachments that feel like love, but are actually loyalty to an older wound. There are dreams that feel ambitious, but were born from the need to be seen. There are relationships that feel familiar, but only because they know how to speak to the part of you that never felt enough. There are fears you have mistaken for wisdom, resentments you have mistaken for protection, and habits you have mistaken for personality. The hidden truth is that not everything you carry belongs to your future. Some things only survived because the old self needed them to feel safe. This is why the price can feel unfair at first. You may wonder why change asks so much from you. Why becoming clearer also makes certain bonds feel heavier. Why healing sometimes creates distance. Why the life you once prayed for can suddenly feel too small. But the deeper pattern is this. The new timeline does not punish you by taking things away. It simply stops supporting what was never aligned with the person you are becoming. What falls away is not always being destroyed. Sometimes it is being revealed psychologically. This is where transformation moves from feeling to choice. It is one thing to sense that you are changing. It is another to stop feeding the patterns that keep proving the old story true. You may notice the same invitations returning, the same emotional loops, the same kind of people, the same temptation to explain yourself, shrink yourself, doubt yourself, or return to what hurts, because at least you know how it hurts. And in that moment, the portal watches quietly, not to judge you, but to show you where your freedom is still incomplete. The emotional realization is that the price of entering the new timeline is not becoming colder. It is becoming honest. Honest enough to admit that some things only felt necessary because you were afraid of who you would be without them. Honest enough to see that certain loyalties were built on guilt. Honest enough to understand that resentment still keeps you connected to what harmed you. Honest enough to stop calling self-betrayal patience. This honesty can feel like loss because it removes the illusions that once softened the cage. And yet, when the old identity finally stops negotiating, something inside becomes strangely calm. Not because everything is solved, but because a deeper part of you has stopped asking permission to exist. You may still feel fear. You may still look back. But the looking back begins to lose its power. The new timeline does not begin with fireworks. It begins with one quiet refusal to betray what you now know. And that refusal reveals the final secret. The door was never waiting somewhere ahead of you. The deepest portal was never outside your life. It was not hidden in a place you had to reach, a sign you had to decode perfectly, or a future moment when everything would finally make sense. It was forming inside you every time you noticed something you used to ignore. Every time you questioned a pattern that once controlled you. Every time you felt the discomfort of truth and did not immediately run back to the comfort of illusion. The door was not waiting for your life to become magical. It was waiting for you to become conscious. This is the final perspective shift. You are not standing before the portal. You are standing inside it. The crossing is happening in the way you no longer react automatically, in the way certain words no longer hypnotize you, in the way you can feel an old version of yourself rising, but you do not always obey it, in the way silence no longer feels empty, but strangely alive. The new version of you is not arriving from somewhere else. It is emerging through the space you create when you stop protecting the false one. And maybe this is why everything has felt so intense lately. Not because life is against you, but because your inner world is reorganizing faster than your outer world can explain. You may still see the same walls, the same streets, the same faces, but you are not the same awareness moving through them. That is why reality feels charged. That is why coincidences feel personal. That is why old patterns feel louder before they disappear. When consciousness changes, ordinary life becomes symbolic. The smallest choice begins to reveal which version of you is choosing. The psychological insight is simple, but not easy. Identity is maintained by repetition. The old self survives every time you repeat the same fear, the same apology, the same silence, the same compromise, the same explanation, the same return. The new self strengthens every time you interrupt the pattern, even quietly. You do not need to become fearless to cross. You only need to stop letting fear be the final authority. You do not need to understand the entire future. You only need to stop using uncertainty as a reason to abandon what you know is true. This is where the emotional meaning becomes personal. You were not imagining the shift. You were not being dramatic for feeling distant from what once defined you. You were not lost simply because you could not explain the space between who you were and who you are becoming. Something in you has been waking up through discomfort, through endings, through strange signs, through silence, through the ache of no longer fitting into your old life. The portal has been speaking through all of it, not to confuse you, but to return you to yourself. And now the question is no longer whether the door will open. It is whether you will recognize that it already has. Not in some distant mystical moment, but here, in the next honest choice. In the next old pattern you do not repeat. In the next fear you listen to without obeying. In the next quiet moment when you feel the old self calling you back, and still turn toward what feels true. Because the portal between two versions of yourself is not a passage you find. It is a passage you become. Maybe now you understand why everything has felt so strange lately. You were not simply confused, lost, or disconnected. You were standing in the space between two versions of yourself, where the old life still knew your name, but the new one had already started calling you from within. That is why familiar places began to feel unfamiliar, why old patterns became harder to tolerate, why certain desires lost their power, and why silence started to feel heavier than noise. The portal was never outside you. It opened the moment your awareness became too honest to keep pretending. Through the dreams, the coincidences, the endings, the emotional waves, and the quiet discomfort, something deeper was rearranging the way you see your life. You are not disappearing. You are crossing. And the crossing does not require you to understand the entire future. It only asks you to stop betraying the truth that has already become clear. You do not need to be fearless. You do not need to be perfect. You only need to recognize the old pattern when it calls, feel the fear without obeying it, and take one honest step toward the version of you that no longer wants to live unconscious. If this message reached you at the right moment, Subscribe to stay close to reflections like this. Like the video if it helped you recognize what is happening inside you, and write the word portal in the comments as a quiet sign that you know where you are now. Because the door does not open someday. It opens the moment you stop asking the old version of yourself for permission to become new.